Hey y'all,
What's going on, guys?
I'm Jay,
And I'm Chris the Bird Nerd.
and we
We
are
are the
the
Bird
Bird Brains.
Brains.
And what are we going to talk about today, Chris?
I don't know. It's
Pressing
late.
topic.
I'm just looking at going to bed. So I'm just kidding.
I'm tired.
We've
I got the flu.
yeah, right. We've got all the odds against us. No, we've had several between the both of us. We've had several people reach out, and in the United States, especially kind of that central southern piece of the United States, we've been having some crazy heat waves and consistent days and weeks well above 100 degrees. We've had quite a few people reaching out, asking what we do to keep our birds cool in the summer and keep our birds warm in the winter. So climate control is what we're going to hit today, Jay.
The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. Bird Brains, Bird Brains. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. The Bird Brains Podcast with Chris and Jay. Bird Brains, Bird Brains.
All right, so climate control. I guess the first place I would approach it from is let's talk about the vast majority of our birds, right? Your finches, most of your decorative is the wrong word, but most of your pet birds,
Yeah,
your
ornamentals.
parrots,
Yeah.
ornamental,
Mhm.
whatever you want to call them, are tropical birds. Um, the one common exception might be canaries, which are more like subtropical. They live pretty far north, right? The Canary Islands are pretty far north.
Yeah.
Um, but almost all the finches, certainly all your Australian finches, any of your Central American birds, like all your seed eaters and stuff like that, all your Africans, all your Asian birds are for the most part tropical near equatorial birds.
Tropical, subtropical. I would even throw in Sahara in there. There are some that are more your desert species. Basically, what we're getting towards is majority of the birds that we keep, especially in the United States, I would probably say majority of Europe as well, are birds that come from warmer climates and don't come from the Antarcticas.
Right, right. Um, so as a general rule, I am much more worried about cold than I am heat,
Yep,
to a point.
yep.
Um, but we'll start with heat, I guess, because that's trending now in real life. That's what's going on in the northern hemisphere, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what if you had to put a number on it, Chris? What's the max temperature before you start to worry?
Yeah. I would say for majority of my species, if the inside of my shed is hitting that 100-degree mark, so probably 98 to like 101, that's when my birds are probably really feeling it. The canaries, especially, they do not like the heat. They are not heat lovers. Um, that's when I start to get worried and try to make sure that they've got some access to cooler air, cooler water, things like that. And
Mhm.
so for my current setup that I have, I've tried to design it in a way to where my aviary that is also connected to my shed through windows has a natural air flow vent system to where air's not just stagnant inside and they're just dying of heat. Now, I also have added a climate control AC, a window AC into my shed for some of my birds that are in there in the cages, and they can't go out to the aviary to access the outside air. I do have that. I have it set so it doesn't kick on until 88 degrees, so it's still on the warmer end, but it kicks on and gets enough airflow going through there that the birds they do pretty good. And then it's just on that it's on a thermostat, so anytime it drops above 88, automatically trigger it to kick on. So these last few weeks, when we've been consistently well above 100 degrees every day, I mean, it's been running a good amount, which will bring up your AC bill. So I guess take that into consideration. But I have opened up my doors and my windows on both ends of my aviary and my shed to get, it's like a natural wind flow that comes through there, and that air does help quite a bit to cool down the inside of the shed. And then the other birds that can have access to the outside aviary, they've got quite a few different natural shade spots that they can go to, bird bath that they can bathe in, that I refill a couple times a day when it's really hot, so they have nice cool water to bathe in, things like that, natural ways for them to cool themselves off. But how about you, Jay? What's kind of your temperature range that you get concerned about, and what do you do about to help it?
Yeah, high 90s. The humidity where I live is really high, so the real feel is always higher than the actual temperature. So anything above like 97, 98, I start to worry because the real feel is going to get up to like 105.
Yeah.
Um, the last year we had a really bad heat wave, and my real feel got up to like 16, and I did lose some birds. So um, that's where I start to worry. And I have some of the similar things to you have. I have the airflow. I have a fan that kicks on above, I think it's above 80. It's when my fan kicks on, but it's not an AC, it's just for air movement.
Yeah.
And then I've also got in my actual aviary, so I have my aviary, the outdoor portion is basically a giant rectangle. And then above that, I have like an attic space with a slanted roof that the birds can't get into,
Hmm.
but heat, the hottest part of the
Yep.
aviary, the birds can't be in. So I do that, and then I've got running water bathing systems for my aviaries, and I keep that water. Really, it's not on purpose. It's just because where else would I put a 7 gallon water jug? But those stay on the floor of the aviary, and so that's naturally the coolest because heat rises, right? So
Yep.
um, as long as they have access to water and some airflow, and you don't want too much direct airflow that they can't get out of because drafts are
Right.
tough on the birds. But
Yep.
as long as the air isn't, like you said, stagnant, as long as they've got somewhere they can take a bath and cool off, or in the case of like my quail, like a dust bath, they can dig down and get to the cool dirt underneath,
Yeah.
and they've got some shade. I don't worry really too much about the heat, especially like any number that starts with an 8. I'm not worried.
Yeah. No, on in mid eight, your 80 range.
It's kind of
That's
where they
awesome.
want to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's prime. Like if I could keep it between 85 and 87 degrees year round, I mean the birds would be super happy. They'd love it. One additional thing that I do, Jay, is my shed. So my shed sits in my backyard. It sits north to south. So when that sun is setting in the west, it's a direct hit to the entire shed and aviary. So it does heat up more when the sun is setting. So and it's more for the winter months, but I my shed is insulated, so I have insulation in between the outside and the inside panels, and it does serve a dual purpose, right? In the winter months, it keeps the heat in there longer, and in the cooler month or in the hotter months, it lets that heat escape out through the roof and keeps the inside of the shed cooler a little bit longer. It takes a little bit more for it to heat up. And I do have a vent at the top of the shed, so all that heat
Mhm.
that rises vents right on out in the
Yeah,
summertime. So
the
that
whole
also
sides
helps.
of my shed are vented, both sides, and so you get some breeze through there and stuff. It helps a
Yeah.
lot.
And I would recommend, if we're talking about a cage setting, if you just got a bird inside your house, you've got a nice cage outside on your patio or things like that, same concept, right? And we've talked about this in past videos, Jay. Be smart about your location of the cages. You don't want your whole cage in direct sunlight in the winter
Right.
or the summer months, right? Because if they can't escape that direct sunlight, they're going to overheat and most likely die. Same on the opposite. Don't just put them all the way in the shade all day, every day, because they'll either get too cold and die or they'll get depressed because they never see any sunlight. So try and give them that mix. Give them the option to where parts of their cage is in the direct sunlight and the other part of their cage is in the shade, or things like that. Put them in areas where they have some nice airflow movement, but like you said, Jay, if they can't escape the drafts or they have direct drafts hitting them nonstop, they're going to get sick, right? It's just like if we sit outside in the cold wind all day, every day, and we can't get out of it, we're going to get cold and get sick as well, right? So it's that same concept. So just trying to find that good medium as best as you can and leave it up to your birds to regulate themselves. If they're cold, where can they go in the cage to heat themselves up? If they're hot, where can they go in their cage to cool themselves down? Try to provide both options for them at all times so that they can kind of self-regulate.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say is I try to keep my birds in a range, right? So I try to keep them above 60 and below like 95 real feel. And as long as I can keep them in that range and give them some options, they regulate where they need and want to be within that range.
Yeah. I have seen breeders that put misters up in their cages in the hot summer
Hmm.
months. The birds
Especially
love
in
that when it's
dry
uh-huh.
areas.
Yep, in Utah, Arizona, Nevada. I mean, those are huge. I mean, they put misters everywhere for humans because we don't have the humidity like you guys do. So it's when we hit 100
Yeah,
degrees,
I don't
it's
need a
it's
mister.
yeah, it's just a direct hot, right? Like, I mean, you're not sweating from humidity. You're sweating just because it's the sun is directly on you and it's intense heat. So misters have been a good option. I know people have done that for their birds, and the birds love to take a bath. I mean, it almost acts like a natural rain, right? And they can stand in it and cool off and whatnot. So that's an option as well when it's too hot to provide for your birds in a drier climate.
Yeah. All right. So I think that covers heat. So let's talk about winter. And you've got a worse winter than I do.
Yeah. So the first thing that I already mentioned was insulating my shed. So that's a huge piece, especially in the winter months. I mean, we typically from January to mid to end of February, we're consistently below freezing more than we're above freezing. So we're below 32 degrees. At nighttime, many times we get below zero, and
And
it's just
we're
cold.
all Fahrenheit, so sorry
Yeah, yep,
Celsius
Fahrenheit,
folks.
not Celsius.
Yeah.
So insulating the shed's the first thing we do, and really that helps to keep the inside of the shed warmer, but then it also helps to block out any drafts of cold. I mean, when it's below freezing and you have that little crack in your shed and the wind's constantly beating through it and hitting your birds, it makes a big difference. So kind of tightening up the shed so no wind can get through. That's the first thing that I do. And growing up, we just had a box aviary that had the back end was fully wooded off, and then we had one side that was covered in wood, and then the rest was wire, right? And so what we would do is we would just wrap it with a plastic throughout the winter and put a measly little heat lamp in there, that it didn't keep it warm in there, but it kept it so the birds weren't below freezing, and we mostly just had zebra finches, budgier parakeets, cockatiels, they're pretty hardy species and they did just fine. Like they can make it through. They can get through some pretty cold winters. But when you have the red-throated parrot finches, the Gouldian finches, some of those other species that are a little bit harder and a little bit more sensitive, you got to do a little bit more than that. So insulated walls. I do put a heater in there that is temp regulated, so it's on a thermostat. So once it gets below a certain point, and I set my thermostats at the last couple of years, I've bred my birds throughout the winter. So I've set it higher. So if it goes below 70, it'll trigger it to kick on. So it's pretty much running all winter. If you're not breeding birds, I would probably set that to like 55. It can go cooler. They'll be fine.
Hmm.
But then it keeps it warm enough to where the birds are fine. But if you are trying to breed them, you need to be within that 65 to 85-degree temp, even with 65 being pretty cold. Like I'd probably say more 70 to 85-degree temps because when you're the parents aren't sitting on the chicks, things like that. They've got to be able to keep themselves warm, and if it's cold outside, they're not going to be able to do that without feathers on. So those are a couple things I do in the wintertime to keep it warm, keep the birds comfortable throughout our very cold winters. How about you, Jay?
Yeah, so in the winter, the coldest it regularly ever gets in Mobile is like right around freezing,
Yeah.
which is yeah would be too cold. And I should have probably said this at the beginning, Chris. I'm curious if you agree. I actually find that the extreme temperatures in either direction aren't necessarily the problem. It's the swings.
Yes.
So the birds can acclimate to pretty chilly or to pretty hot, but going so like the when I'm actually most worried is like in the spring and the fall
Yep.
to where when it's 85 during the day and 55 at night. So
That's when
that's a
I lose
big
the most
drop.
birds
Yeah,
because of those major swings.
so I in the winter I seal off the like I talked about earlier, the sides of the shed that are vented. I close those vents off with plastic wrap. And then around the actual aviary, I have like plastic panels, the same ones I use for the roof that I put around the outside. And then I have a heater outside and a heater inside. Inside, I try to keep it around 80, which is easier for me to do than it is for you. And
Yeah.
then outside, I try to keep it above 60. Um, the other things I'll do, like this will happen to me really early in the breeding season or really late in the breeding season if I have chicks, especially like parrot finches, Gouldians, chicks like that, that I know are about to hatch, and I'm like, 60. I'll move the heater so that it's right underneath that nest.
Yeah. Yep.
Because between when they hatch and about day 10, they're featherless. And so if mom is on them, they'll be okay. But if she goes out to eat or whatever and she's off them for a few hours, I can lose chicks that way. So I'll
Yeah.
sit the heater right under there. So even though it's heating the whole space to 60, right there, it's wafting, another extra 10 degrees or so.
Yeah.
And I have everything on thermostats as well. And in fact, even my cameras have like a temperature alert that they'll send me when it gets too high or too low. And then, as long as I can keep it above 60, usually they're okay in the winter. Um, it's never going to be perfect if you have a bird that is already sick or egg bound. Egg binding, big concern in the cold weather, especially. If you have a bird that is already sick, uh, that's when I really worry about temperature. And if I'll
Yeah.
move those birds into a hospital cage with a heat lamp on one side so that they can self-regulate, like we already talked about. But as a general rule, birds that are acclimated, that are well fed, that are healthy, can handle pretty darn hot and reasonably cold.
Yeah. And I would just say in the spring and fall seasons, if your birds are outside, just be proactive. Look at what your temperatures are going to be like that evening and the next day. Utah, Jay knows this. I send him videos all the time. We literally would have, 65, 70-degree temps during the day. It's a nice spring day, and we wake up to snow on the ground. It's like, and it's just, crazy temperature changes. So just be aware of that. And I would say also, Jay, it's not so much the extreme hot and the extreme cold, but it's the elements within that, right? It's the wind, it's the rain or the snow. If the birds can escape that and find, a place that even if it's not warm, but they're protected from the cold winds and the wetness, that's gonna do more for them than than having a heater in there, but the wind's still hitting them all night, right? So um, so just be aware of that. I don't wrap up my aviary in the winter time. I have my windows that connect the aviary to my shed, and so I'll close it at night. But if it's a sunny day and it's still 37 degrees out there, I'll open up my windows and my birds will spend a good majority of the day out there getting direct sunlight and enjoying the cooler temps. So they do like it. It's just, be aware of, where's the wind coming, where's the snow coming, and then, it's 70 degrees one day. and the next day it's going to be 35 degrees, you probably want to, have some caution there. Make sure your birds are inside sheltered for that quick temp change, so that they're safe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's exactly right. The biggest thing is blocking the wind and the elements, right? So a dry, not windy 35 is not as bad as a cold, windy, wet 55, right?
Right,
So
right.
as long as they have a way to get out of the elements, get out of the wind, they can handle some temperature pretty well. And I think the main thing I'll just say to everybody is, yeah, watch your weather. I obsess over the weather. I pay attention. Don't get caught slipping,
He even
right? It's
watches
happened to
my
me
weather.
before.
He sends me the weekly update of, hey,
Yeah,
this is
I
what your weather
do.
looks like.
I do. But your birds can handle it, so
Yeah.
don't stress about it too much. Like I had somebody this week. They're in Northern California, and they're like, okay, it's going to get to 90 uh, this week. Do I need to get a? Uh, it's like a humidity exchange cooler or something, and I stopped him because I was like, first of all, you know, he had like zebras, societies, and Goulians. I was like, first of all those birds can handle 90,
All right.
dry 90, no problem.
Yep.
Second of all, you don't want to do something to suck humidity out of the room because birds need humidity for things like hatching, big
Yep.
time.
Hmm.
Um, so don't panic as much as you might be panicking about weather. Plan ahead, have a plan,
Yeah.
execute your plan, and you should be okay.
Yep. And I'd say the same thing in an aviary setting or a cage setting, in the house,
Hmm.
outside of the house. Have your plan, execute it right, make sure the birds have options of, as far as the elements, they can self-regulate. Their cage just isn't in one location where they can't choose whether to cool themselves down or heat themselves up, right? So we want them to have those choices. So strategically place your cages, so that the birds can do that and self-regulate. That's your best option there for a happy, healthy bird.
Do your homework, right?
Do your homework. Still coming. I still haven't made it on the t-shirt. I need to. I just don't
Yeah,
have time.
I need to update merch too. I've been thinking
It,
about that. I had
it's
actually a good, my buddy Daniel sent me some, he was messing around, I guess, with some art editing or whatever, and sent me some really cool Javiary logos.
oh,
And I was
nice.
like, all right, I'm going to make them in t-shirts, but I haven't yet. I got to make
You,
one and send it to him. But
you should tell him to make some for me. I need some new ones. I just don't have time to do it.
I'll
If
talk to him about
anybody
it. Yeah.
out there wants to make
He
some
doesn't
cool
have
logos
kids yet,
for us,
so he's got time.
let me know. I'll even pay you. So
Yeah, we will certainly give you lots and lots of free advertising.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And
So
all right, so I think that's good for climate control. We'll say it one more time, and then maybe next week we'll break the news. But there is a big announcement coming.
yeah, yeah,
So if you made it here to the end, drop a comment. Let's hear some guesses.
yeah. I
Drop it
like
down in the
that.
comments, see what you got, and maybe whoever, if we get some correct guesses, maybe those people will be
Yeah,
benefactors of the new
yeah.
announcement. You'll be some of the first people to
Absolutely.
get some, let's just say, some free samples.
There we go. I like that.
Hmm.
I'm
All
all
right,
for
Chris, where can they find you if they got a question about how to keep their birds hot or cold?
it. Yeah, reach out to me. Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. All of it is Bird Nerd, same logo. Instagram's Bird Nerd 4, but everything else is the same. And please reach out to me. I love hearing you guys. Love communicating with you and chatting birds. So, Jay, how about you?
I am on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Reddit, and I'm on Threads, which sucks. And I'll say this too. If you are a long time listener to this podcast and you're not following us on all this stuff, help us out. Come on now. What are
Yeah.
you doing?
Yes, please.
If you're a first
Please.
timer, hit that, ding that little subscribe button, go find mine, subscribe. We're not getting paid to do this. We're doing this out of the love of birds and the
Yes,
hobby
the
and to try
hobby.
to help people. So if you could take the extra 5 seconds to help us, that'd be awesome.
Yes, please.
Mhm. All right. Well, that's all she wrote for climate control.
Let's do it. Appreciate you guys.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, y'all. We'll catch you in the next one.